the nature of language change. Change is the only certainty. So let's look at this fact that how does it take place in language. We look at some of the factors which are internal for the change in a language. If you listen to these few verses of Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, you'll be surprised to know that this is very different from the present day or modern day English, though it's taken from the modern English. Chaucer is known as the first poet of modern English era. So when we look at this, when that April with his short saute, the drought of March had pierced to the rote, and bathed every vine in sweet liquor, of which virtue engendered is the flower. Obviously, I cannot pronounce it the way it must have been pronounced at the time of Chaucer. But if you look at these, if listen to these verses, you find that it's some other English, some type of other English. Whereas if you look at the modern translation or modern script of these lines of Canterbury Tales, you find that they are very difficult. So why this takes place? Why language change? We feel that language changes not only semantically, syntactically, but also phonetically, as you have just seen. For example, you have seen showers saute. So showers sweet. Here you see with his showers sweet. Showers which were sweet. So sweet is modifying showers, whereas it has come after a post-modifying position. So in present English, we have a different syntax of an English phrase in which an adjective comes before a noun. In these lines is different from the modern English. If we assume that it is still the same English, same language English, we have to conclude that language has changed. As I just said that during all this period, even modern English has changed. Not to speak of the first period of English that start from 450 up to 1066 till the War of Hastings. So there is a lot of change, as I said, in every aspect of language. But why does this happen? The question is why people change their language. Why does it not remain the same language? Obviously, if we are talking about English language, it means that the same thing takes place in other languages too. The statement that languages change is in fact metaphorical in nature, right? So what is that? That it is metaphorical. Let's look at some of the facts of this language change. It presupposes that we conceive of a language as an organism that grows, changes, and sometimes dies. So when we say that language changes, it means that it has a beginning. It is like an organism, like a living being that grows, that is born, then it grows, and then it dies. And during all these stages, it keeps on changing, as human being or any living thing changes itself in different periods of its life. Languages have a mode of existence outside their users. So language is not something that exists within the users. It also exists outside the users. How? Though we say that the moment the last speaker of a language dies, the language also dies. A language primarily exists in the minds of its speakers. This is why we say that a language has died when its last speaker has died, as I just said. So it is speakers that change their language while using it in language perception and production. So the change is due to the change of the speaker's own thinking, speaker's own perception of language. So it is the speaker that keep on changing the languages. Language actually does not change. It actually, the speakers of the language change it. Why do language user change their language? So here we have the question that what it is that prompt them to change the language. In fact, change is not always the appropriate word for what we are going on. So we can think of something else. It would be better to speak of construction or innovation of language. So here we have a point that when we talk about language change, actually we are talking about construction of the language in a new way or bringing some innovation to a language. So by changing, we mean that speaker reconstruct the language in some novel way, or they make some creative, innovative in their language. Why? Because they have some needs to change the language, to reconstruct the language. What does change? When new words or new meanings of words get established is the lexical norm of that language, not the system behind it. So it is the lexical norm of that language that prompts some speaker to change that language, not the system forces anything on the speaker to change the language. The main reason for changing the lexical norm of a language is that language user need expression, new concept or new things. Obviously, if you look at this, even in this century, we have been introduced to a lot of new things. I mean, just think of internet, just think of computer, and you have a lot of new words. So obviously these new words were started to be used by the speaker of the language because they needed them, they needed new words. So this need for new word prompted or forced the speaker to use new words. One way of meeting this need is extending the meaning of existing word. Obviously there is already some word that is being used in one way. So what does the speaker do? The speaker also started using the same word for that new need. For example, a printer was a person who used the task of printing, like books, like other things. But when we had a printer, right, a printer of a computer, so the same word printer that was used for a person employed for the machine as well. But does it take the same form in other language as well? Let's look at this. For example, mouse, obviously the small tiny animal, this reptile, right? So we started using it for a device to navigate on the computer. Similarly, we have hard disk that was there to store memory of the computer. Similarly, antivirus program. So you look at this, these are quite new. These words have quite new meanings. These words might be there in the language before they were started to be used in their new meanings. So it was a sort of innovation in English language. Lexical gaps can also be filled through borrowing. Obviously, we have talked a lot on borrowing when we saw that how do one language borrows words from other language. So this task of innovation is also done through borrowings. For example, Dutch word printer, as I just said, right? Many words from English, they have borrowed many words from English, like printer. Though they had the drukker word for a person who prints, but they took the word printer from English language. The change of the lexical norms consists of two steps. The first step is that an individual language user coins a new lexical unit, a word or phrase, borrows one from another language, right? So what user coins or borrows? or gives an existing word a new interpretation, as in the case of printer, that, or in the case of mouse, because printer and mouse were there in English language and these two words were given new interpretation. So supra-individual lexical norms, this means that once a person has thought of using a word or in a new way, this is by and by accepted by many users, and thus this word comes into the lexicon of a speaking community. Lexical innovation, users need to express new concepts. This is when they innovate new lexical item, they want new concepts. The study of language change has a psychological and social dimension. So sometimes it is the need of a certain social phenomena, and sometimes it is just an innovation of the mind. A second source of linguistic innovation beside changing the lexical norm is reanalysis. Language user cannot grasp the system behind a language in a direct fashion, right? So when they are looking at the language, it is very difficult for them to grasp the whole system. So the only evidence they have are output of the system, concrete cases of languages. So what they have is the word that are being used, that are of the system that they are employing. This opens up the possibility that a language user reconstruct the system underlying the perceived output in a slightly different way than the previous user. So this is one of the reasons that why children give new make new words which are not being used by the adult. For example, we can have the example of go and goat and bringed by children. So we can sum up this: language user may be involved in language change at different stages of their lives, and this may be because of reconstruction, because of some innovation, or it may be due to some social need or some psychological need.